Coming up on Bridge City News, the owner of the Canadian Martial Arts Centre in Lethbridge has had a change of heart when it comes to opening his gym next week. We hear from an agriculture instructor at Olds College who discusses how much COVID-19 has impacted our food supply. And violent protests continue in Minneapolis, Minnesota, following the death of a 46-year-old black man who died in police custody.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. After months of being closed, the City of Lethbridge is reopening all playgrounds, outdoor fitness equipment, picnic tables, and park benches tomorrow. As Micah Quinn explains, the city says they're urging us to take precautions as we make our way back to some of our beautiful parks.
And with that, playgrounds in Lethbridge are officially reopened starting May 29th.
And I know that'll make a lot of children happy and really excited. What has not changed is the requirement for physical distancing.
Ellis is urging parents of children to be extra careful with social distancing and using hand sanitizer.
Children, when they're excited, are obviously going to be excited to see friends and interact with other kids. I know it's been tough on them the last few months. But they're going to need reminding to keep some distance with your friends, yell at each other, talk at a distance, and also clean your hands.
There are 123 playgrounds in Lethbridge, and the city says they aren't in a position to clean them daily.
Hopefully with weather and with time between use, they'll be as safe as they can be, but it is important for kids to wash their hands before and after they use the playgrounds.
Washrooms and picnic shelters in city parks are not so lucky, and they will continue to remain closed at this time. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Here's a follow-up to a story we first brought you on Bridge City News. The owner of the Canadian Martial Arts Centre has had a change of heart and will not be opening up on June 1st as originally planned. Lee Mien says after speaking with both Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf and the AHS, he will not be reopening his business for classes. He says he will continue to work with government agencies about when is the best time to reopen. The province says stage 3 of the relaunch strategy includes gyms. There's no firm date on when that will be. Lee Mien, the owner of the Canadian Martial Arts Centre, says instead of reopening on Monday, they'll be hosting a free barbecue at 5:30 p.m. to thank members for their support. Lethbridge police need our help identifying a person of interest in connection with a fire behind a downtown business on Monday. Lethbridge Police and EMS were called to an alley of a business at 6th Street and 3rd Avenue South. When they arrived, they saw a fire next to a business. Fortunately, there were no injuries and damage was estimated at around $1,000. Police obtained a video surveillance which shows an unknown male walking through an alley shortly before the fire. If you recognize this man, call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. The agriculture sector has been the bread and butter of our economy for many years. Many farmers and producers are not happy with the government offering just $252 million to help them during the COVID-19 crisis, especially when they were expecting $2.5 billion. Mark Fournier is an agriculture instructor at Olds College, and he says the coronavirus has dramatically impacted our producers, but when it comes to providing food for Canadians, we still have an ample supply.
And now, people being people, are starting to purchase in bulk more than they have in the past. People are starting to fill their freezers more because of the uncertainty. And of course, that's led to an increase in demand, short term at least, for the meat that we're seeing at the grocery store. So there is concern over this. But because of the robustness of our system and the supplies that we have in place, I think it's more of a production concern than a consumer concern.
Catch the entire interview with Mark Fournier, an instructor with the Workland School of Agriculture, coming up after Business News. Today is International Burger Day. Lethbridge has a number of hamburger joints with unique menu items. Dylan's Burgers is no different. They shared with BCN some unique meals that you may have a hard time resisting.
We rotate through quite a few different ones. Currently we're doing a breakfast burger, so a burger with an egg, a hash brown, ketchup, all the fun stuff, cheddar all on there to make it into the ultimate of breakfast burgers. All of our burgers, we grind our beef, so we're doing 30% bacon ground into it. So if you're interested in bacon and burgers, we're definitely the way to go. Sometimes as we're doing things and just like, ooh, wait a minute, we should do this. It's kind of how the bacon burger came about. We were just grinding some beef for burgers and we had bacon. We thought, oh, we should really just do this. And so that happened.
Dylan's Burgers is open for curbside and delivery services. You know, they say April showers bring May flowers, but this year it's May showers, and they seem to be bringing with them flooded basements. As Jeanette Roche explains, well over 500 homes in southern Alberta have been affected this past week alone.
Now that we have the carpets ripped up, you can see these cracks in the foundation.
Caleb Light points out cracks in the concrete of his basement bedroom where water leaked through beneath the carpet. He and his family got a big surprise this week when they noticed a strange smell coming from their basement.
We thought one of the cats had peed, so we were looking around for the source of the smell.
But it wasn't the cat. It was musky groundwater seeping through the foundation of the concrete from beneath the carpeting.
The cracks extend all the way right into the closet, and the entire closet was soaked as well.
Turns out the heavy rains last week and tons of snow this past winter could be the culprit.
On Thursday and Friday of last week, we received a fair substantial amount of rain in a very short period of time. And basically what happens is the ground is not capable of absorbing that much moisture that quickly.
And normally it would be the sump pump in your basement keeping that groundwater from coming up too high.
Some pumps aren't always capable of keeping up with the sheer volume of water that's potentially coming into that pump.
Sure enough, the sump pump in this house stopped working. As you can see, the water table in this one is well above the floater and has overflowed, causing damage to this basement. A basement that will now have to be dried out, ripped up, and remodeled to get it back to normal. The damage can run in the tens of thousands of dollars, and unfortunately, this case isn't an isolated incident.
About midday on Thursdays, when the calls for our office anyway started coming in, and it wasn't just in one particular area. It really was in pretty much all four corners of Lethbridge, Tabor, down to Iron Springs, up to Picture Butte. I wouldn't be surprised if the number has to be somewhere between 5 and 1,000 homes within the surrounding area that has been affected.
In most cases, a flooded basement can be covered by insurance.
Now, this is the old broken sump pump from this house. Now, keep in mind, to replace them only costs about $150 to $200. So it could be a wise investment to replace them every few years. It could save yourself a ton of money in the long run. For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Roche.
There is not an industry that hasn't been affected by COVID-19 and the pandemic. Horseback riding is no different. BCN's Ainsley O'Reilly visited Tailwind Equestrian in Lethbridge recently to see how they've been coping.
Many horse stables across the province have reopened their doors as part of the government's Phase 1 relaunch. Tailwind Equestrian says that they haven't had to make too many changes.
We always stay 12 feet away from the adjacent horse. So when handling the animals or mounted on the animals, we're always social distancing. We always have. The term biosecurity is a day-to-day reality for anybody that's dealing with animals.
Like many businesses, COVID-19 has impacted this Lethbridge County stable.
It's already a struggle to keep this going on a month-to-month, and then when we deal with a crisis like this, it's even tougher.
According to Equine Canada, 46,500 horses are at risk of losing their basic necessities. You might think that government funding is accessible, but this industry slips through the cracks.
So many sport organizations can get government funding for this or that or the other thing. We don't seem to fall into that. And also small business, we don't fall into that. We don't fall into agriculture. We're kind of our own entity that gets missed.
As for the riders, the pandemic has impacted them greatly.
Obviously, I will not be competing this summer, which is a big bummer for myself, which is what I do all summer.
This sport is my therapy, so for me, I have an anxiety disorder, so when the pandemic started, I had a relapse. He's my therapist.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
The very first bookmobile was launched in April of 1905. The Lethbridge Public Library is keeping that tradition alive by making stops around the city with their very own bookmobile.
The bookmobile, it is a mobile library branch, so the goal has always been to provide kind of full library services from the bookmobile, so that we're actually bringing library services into neighborhoods where maybe people don't have as easy access to a branch. We know that there was a lot of desire to have access to library materials again. And again, the bookmobile is a way to make that access for people easier. So people who don't have vehicles, who can't get to a branch easily, this makes it so that they can access library materials. So we anticipate that it's going to be a popular service and is filling a need in the community.
The bookmobile's next stop will be at the Nicholas Sharon Pool on June the 2nd. The University of Lethbridge announced today that it has appointed Dr. Shannon Spenceley as the new acting dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences. Spenceley was most recently the associate dean and has held a number of roles in the delivery and administration of healthcare in southern Alberta. She previously taught at Lethbridge College and has been at the U of L since 2011. Her research portfolio includes work on primary care reform and care of the elderly, specifically those who suffer with dementia. The Spenceley appointment is for 1 year and commences on Monday. She fills the vacancy when Dr. Robert Wood was appointed the university's interim vice president of research. A man with Alberta license plate says his car was vandalized recently in Revelstoke, British Columbia. There was also a note on his windshield telling him to go home. Matt Graham has been working in Revelstoke and was surprised that someone would key his car and leave a note containing graphic language. Revelstoke Mayor Gary Saltz says a series of isolated incidents involving vandalism rising in his city are not a representation of his community.
For the majority of us here in Revelstoke, we are very happy to have Albertans here in the community. So this doesn't represent the community as a whole. It's really a small. We're seeing the reverse of that now, where there's some group of people going around with letters placed on vehicles from out of province, welcoming them to the community and want to make sure that that they feel at ease here. They are welcome here. And when this crisis is all over, we would definitely like people from other provinces to come and enjoy our community as freely as they did before the COVID pandemic.
The Alberta government announced that there were 25 new cases of COVID-19. That brings the total number in our province to 679. 43 people are in hospital. There were also 2 new deaths. So far, 143 people have died from the coronavirus, but fortunately, 6,160 people have also recovered from the virus. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dean Henshaw, says Albertans have to be concerned as well now that there's another virus that affects children.
In the past several weeks, cases of a new condition called multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, or MISC, have been reported in a number of jurisdictions. It is similar to an inflammatory disease known as Kawasaki's disease and responds to treatments such as steroids. It has been seen in the UK, Italy, Quebec, and the United States. Potential cases are also being explored in other provinces across the country. Today, I am announcing that one possible case of MISC is being investigated in Alberta this week. Reported cases across the jurisdictions I mentioned involve children and adolescents with recent infection with the virus, with the syndrome seeming to develop several weeks to about a month after an infection.
The province of Alberta wants to set maximum time limits for energy project approvals. Alberta Energy Minister Sonia Savage says it takes too long for the Alberta Energy Regulator to make decisions. If proposed legislation is passed, it would allow Premier Jason Kenney's cabinet to put timelines in place. The bill fulfills a promise Kenney made in the 2019 spring provincial election campaign. Our province's Auditor General says he will look into Alberta's response to the pandemic crisis. Doug Wiley says his investigation will focus on how much the province has spent, value for money, and program outcomes. He says he received many inquiries from the public and members of the legislature on provincial spending that he says have a significant impact on the lives of all Albertans. He says his findings will be reported to the legislature this fall. Police in Calgary have opened a hate crime investigation into graffiti sprayed on the wall of a Chinese consulate building. 3 suspects wearing masks and black clothing were caught on video early yesterday, spray painting vulgar messages referencing COVID-19. Police say it's the second time in a week that a downtown building has been vandalized. There has been a worldwide increase in hate crimes against the Chinese community and people of Asian descent who have been scapegoated during the pandemic. An ongoing outbreak of the coronavirus in northern Saskatchewan has claimed 2 more lives. The province says the latest deaths include a person in their 60s and one in their 80s. That brings the total number of deaths in the province to 10. Health officials are also reporting 3 new cases of COVID-19, 1 in the far north and 2 in Regina, bringing the provincial total to 637. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister says he wants answers from Ottawa on whether Indigenous powwows are allowed under COVID-19 restrictions. Pallister says he plans to raise the issue in a phone call with the Prime Minister tonight.
One of the bands in Manitoba has announced that they're planning on going ahead with a powwow. COVID doesn't know any boundaries. We have had great success in this province partnering and working with Indigenous communities and leaders to keep COVID out of our communities, and now is not the time to begin to disrespect public health orders that have kept Manitobans safe, all Manitobans. So I'll be raising this on the call with the Prime Minister because there have been mixed messages coming out of the federal government about this. We're not people who believe in two-tier health. All of us don't have an immunity to COVID or its impacts on us and our communities and our friends.
Members of Parliament from every opposition party have joined forces calling on the Liberal government to reverse its decision to allow funding to expire for programs that help victims of human trafficking in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Programs supporting the fight against sexual exploitation and human trafficking and services to these victims have stopped. Programs where young girls can turn to the London Abused Women's Centre are being forced to end their programs. These programs are vital. These programs save lives. These programs give people a second chance, and these programs are working to end human trafficking and sexual exploitation.
For those under 18, Article 35 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, it states that the parties shall take all appropriate measures to prevent the abduction, the sale of, or traffic in children for any purpose or in any form. Under the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 22 states that parties shall take measures in conjunction with Indigenous peoples to ensure that Indigenous women and children enjoy the full protection and guarantees against all forms of violence and discrimination.
The coronavirus pandemic has taken its toll on many of us, not just financially, but spiritually and mentally as well. Psychologist Dr. Greg Jans, who wrote the book 5 Keys to Health and Healing, says even during dark times like these, it's important to focus on our blessings and have an attitude of gratitude.
Gratitude begins to change our perspective. Gratitude moves us from being self-absorbed to we begin to see, well, maybe there's others I can be of help. Gratitude begins to create something called optimism. Optimism means I have hope. I'm looking towards the future. So let's create more optimism right now.
Dr. Jans will have more on looking at the positive side of life with BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our program. A man was shot to death as violent protests over the death of a 46-year-old black man continued in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Police said a suspect in the shooting is in custody. 4 Minneapolis police officers have been fired for their involvement in the death of George Floyd, who was held down with a knee as he protested that he could not breathe.
Officers arrived in the area, located an adult male in grave condition, laying down on the sidewalk. Officers immediately began first aid to include CPR. Hennepin County Sheriff's deputies arrived on the scene and assisted. Paramedics were able to get through the crowds and transported the adult male victim to Hennepin County Medical Center, where he was pronounced deceased.
The violent protests continued in Minneapolis last night as many were angry over the death of George Floyd. Looting was reported from various local businesses, with video showing people entering stores through broken windows and leaving with merchandise. The attorney for the family of George Floyd, who died in Minneapolis police custody, said black people have suffered from the pandemic of racism and discrimination that leads to unjustified killings long before the COVID-19 outbreak.
If you have a cell phone and you take the cell phone and you set the stopwatch for 9 minutes and you just sit there and let the time pass and think about somebody with their knee on your neck and you're struggling to breathe and they won't remove it until you suffocate, well, that is the last minutes of George Floyd's life, and it's just, in a word, murder. That was the allegation that he was trying to commit some kind of forgery, which is at worst a non-violent crime, but yet the police use violent, excessive, lethal force when they came upon him that just doesn't make sense. You want them to be arrested immediately because we see them murder George Floyd while he's in handcuffs face down, and they literally cause him to die because they got their knee on his throat where he can't breathe.
By the way, the mayor of Minneapolis is calling for criminal charges to be filed against the police officer who was seen on video kneeling on the neck of Floyd, who died in police custody. The launch of a SpaceX rocket ship with 2 NASA astronauts on a history-making flight into orbit was called off yesterday with less than 17 minutes to go. The reason? The danger of lightning.
In Dragon SpaceX, unfortunately, we are not going to launch today. You are go for 5.100 launch scrub.
5.100, it was a good effort by the teams, and we understand, and we'll meet you there.
It's better to be safe. I mean, we all remember Challenger, people my age. Nobody ever wants to see that, go through that as a country. We all knew that this was a possibility, especially seeing the weather.
I love to see us launching our men back into space. It's great. And it's one of those things that in these times, space is one of those things that just kind of unites everyone. There's no real sides to it. It's a universal thing. It's a human element. So that was a really cool thing to be a part of. And even though the launch didn't happen, it was nice kind of just seeing people just being good to each other and all just getting behind a central cause.
Great to see the sunshine and warm temperatures. They should continue for the rest of this week and into the weekend. Full weather details are on deck. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a look at the weather picture. Jeanette, for the rest of this week and the weekend, we should consider lathering up with some sunscreen.
Yeah, definitely. And you know why? That's because our UV indexes are getting really high this week. Today, as a matter of fact, we had a UV index of 10, which is the first time this year that UV has hit a double digit. So sunscreen, definitely a good idea. So taking a look into tonight, partly cloudy skies, 9 degrees is the overnight low, a nice light wind of 20 km per hour. Into tomorrow, sunny skies, high 25 tomorrow, and into the evening, also 9 degrees overnight. So not too bad. Pretty lovely weekend ahead of us too. 27 the high for Saturday under sunny skies. Sunshine expected as well on Sunday, 24 degrees. 23 expected on Monday with a mix of sun and cloud. Partly cloudy skies expected for both Tuesday and Wednesday as well, with highs of 26 for those days. And as you could see, those highs are getting higher as they're the mid to the high 20s, which is definitely higher than the average high for this time of year, which is 20. The low average is 6. The highest temperature on this day was in 1986. It was 33 degrees, and the chilliest evening was -5. That was in 1947. The sun rose this morning at 5:32 a.m. and our Thursday evening sunset 9:26 p.m. There you go. It's about 16 hours of sunlight, close to. Let's take a look at what's happening on the West Coast. Lots of sunshine tomorrow expected in Victoria, 24 degrees, 22 the high for Vancouver, mix of sun and cloud. Lots of sunshine expected in Calgary tomorrow, 23 is the high. 19 the high in Edmonton, and a mix of sun and cloud. Over in Saskatoon, 19 also expected. Increasing clouds there, mix of sun and cloud expected for Regina, 21 degrees. 15 is the high in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. Now let's take a look further east into central Canada. Toronto will be seeing a slight chance of showers. 24 degrees is the high. We've got still that heat warning in effect for Ottawa, Montreal, as that heat and humidity is pushing further east. The humidity is building into a risk of a thunderstorm for both Ottawa and Montreal tomorrow. Fredericton also under a heat warning. Lots of humidity there as well. 30 degrees is their high with a mix of sun and cloud. Lots of sunshine expected in Charlottetown tomorrow. 27 is their high. Chance of some drizzle in Halifax. 19 is their high. 23 the high over in St. John's, Newfoundland. There you go. That is your weather.
With a recent court ruling against Huawei CEO Meng Wanzhou, optimism is fading that China will end its year-long spat with Canada over canola imports. A judge ruled yesterday that extradition proceedings will continue against Meng. That has dampened hopes that the Asian nation may reinstate export licenses of Canadian canola shippers before farmers harvest a new crop this fall. The disruption so far has resulted in an estimated loss of $1 billion to producers in Canada. Canola futures fell 0.5% on the news today. Boeing is cutting more than 12,000 jobs through layoffs and buyouts as the aircraft manufacturer deals with a downturn in air travel caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The layoffs are expected to be concentrated in the Seattle area.
Boeing said today that they were going to be notifying employees that they're making their first layoff since the COVID virus hit. They're going to lay off over 6,700 people. They also said that about 5,500 have taken buyouts, so they're eliminating about more than 12,000 jobs. And since the pandemic hit, they've seen airline customers pushing back their deliveries of new planes and changing or canceling orders for planes because they don't see an immediate need for more planes. They've got too many planes already. Air travel has just fallen off the cliff. It's down roughly 90% worldwide. It fell as badly as 96% in the US.
It's just that to get back to the peak where we were, the kind of growth rates we saw before this pandemic, you're going to need a vaccine. People are going to need to feel good that there's no risk. And that's really an 18-month process. So until then, it's going to be difficult. It's not just the jets that aren't being built and the people not being employed in the Puget Sound area. It's the bodies of 737 MAXs not being built in Wichita, the engines not being built in Ohio, the control systems not being built in Britain. There are ripple effects all over the global economy.
Just as Boeing said it was cutting 12,000 jobs, comes word that the company has resumed production of its grounded 737 MAX jetliner. 2 deadly crashes of MAX jets pushed Boeing into a financial crisis months before the novel coronavirus squeezed global air travel to a trickle. Boeing executives expect to resume deliveries on the plane before October, which will give the company some much-needed cash. There are many reasons for starting Canada Pension Plan payments as early as the age of 60, but only a few of them are good reasons according to financial planners. There are even fewer good reasons for starting CPP early when you're still working and contributing to the plan.
So a few years ago, they changed the rules on collecting CPP. So you can start taking CPP at age 60, but it's going to be with a reduced benefit. So if you take it at age 60, it will be reduced by approximately 36% by starting early. If you take CPP at age 60, you are required to continue to make those contributions if you are still working up until age 65. At age 65, you have the option, if you're still working, to continue contributing to CPP or not. You know, if you already have, say, 35 years of maximum contributions, you may just want to start taking your CPP now and get the post-retirement benefits, because the post-retirement benefits are going to continue to add to your CPP benefit check.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 9 points on the day to finish at 15,262. The Dow was down 147 points to 25,400. The S&P 500 was down 6 points to 3,029, and the Nasdaq was down 43 points to finish up at 93.68. Oil was up 85 cents to 33.66 per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to $1.82. Gold was down 11 cents to $17.1822 an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $17.38 an ounce. Wheat is at $240 per metric ton. Barley is also at $240. Canola is at $4.67, and corn is at $229 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 68 cents to $101.60. Feeder cattle were up $1.48 to $136.03, and lean hogs were down $3.25 to $58.80. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 72.62 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the City of Lethbridge announced that it is reopening playgrounds and other park amenities effective tomorrow. That will include all play structures, outdoor fitness equipment, park benches, and picnic tables. City officials say while they're reopening, public washrooms and picnic shelters will remain closed during the coronavirus pandemic. Even during a pandemic, there's a reason to be optimistic. That's according to psychologist Dr. Greg Jans. Catch his enlightening interview with BCN's Jeanette Roche shortly.
As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc around the world, many are grappling with loneliness, anxiety, and depression. It seems like we've lost control and perhaps we've lost a little hope. Today's guest has some timely advice and encouragement. Dr. Greg Jans is a psychologist and author and founder of the Center, a Place of Hope, one of the top facilities for treatment of depression in the U.S. His latest book is 5 Keys to Health and Healing. Dr. Greg Jess, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, such an important topic and good to be with you today.
Awesome. So your book starts out by saying everyone struggles with challenges in life, but we all need hope. Why is hope so vital to our health?
Well, you take this panic pandemic we've been in. I'm calling it a panic pandemic, but now we've got to shift and look at this pandemic with a purpose. And the purpose has got to be we've got to reset some things in our life. And so what I talk about, and we work with folks who come in from all international, all over to work on anxiety and depression. And the reason being is we've reached an emotional saturation point. People have reached their limit. They're on this edge of despair. And so today, our topic of hope, and hope comes when you have a plan. Today, we want to help begin to create a plan for hope.
Yeah, exactly. Now, why is it that we tend to worry so much? And how can we learn to control our thought life?
Yeah, how about that? We have a lot to worry about right now, too. It's where we put our point of focus. Some of us learn to be really good warriors. And so you have a pandemic, you have a lot to worry about. And we can keep layering our life with worry, which will take us to anxiety. By the way, if you have anxiety if you have physical symptoms. So I got sweaty palms, my heart rate's up, shortness of breath, digestive, aches and pains. You've got anxiety. So I can take worry and turn it into anxiety, but I need to stop and hit that pause button today and go, okay, what do I really need to change? Well, one of the things we've got to change is how we think. And we need to learn what's it mean to renew our thinking? What's it mean to begin to put the truth in? Because worry and anxiety, it distorts reality.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going through that right now too, especially with everything that's going on. Yeah. Now, you suggest in your book that gratitude or a thankful heart is actually an antidote for toxic thinking. How so?
Yes, gratitude. What an interesting word at this time. You go, I don't have much to be thankful for. And we get into that thinking mode. What if, just what if the next 30 days you decided, I'm going to live a little differently. I'm going to start my day with 3 gratitudes. 3 gratitudes. I'm going to write down, I'm going to create a gratitude journal. Here you go. I'm going to start today. I'm going to write down my 3 gratitudes every day. And just maybe it's something really simple, which is usually the best gratitudes. But notice over time that gratitude begins to change our perspective. Gratitude moves us from being self-absorbed to we begin to see, well, maybe there's others I can be of help. Gratitude begins to create something called optimism. Optimism means I have hope. I'm looking towards the future. So let's create more optimism right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's so easy to allow those negative emotions to take control. So, I mean, like anger and fear, right? You refer in your book to anger, fear, and guilt as an emotionally toxic trinity. Can you explain?
Oh, yes. Anger, I call them the 3 deadly emotions. Anger, fear, and guilt. Anger, another word for anger could be hurt. Another word for anger could be frustration. Hey, by the way, we have a lot to possibly be angry and frustrated with right now. But as we start looking and going, okay, am I going to be ruled by anger and hurt? Maybe I need to figure out some forgiveness here. So there's anger. If I'm going to be healthy, I've got to learn how to deal with anger and frustration. The next one's fear, worry, anxiety. Fear is the great paralyzer. Fear keeps us in a place of paralyzation. We don't take much action. We're afraid. We hold inward. That's fear. And then there's guilt. Guilt can be usually shame. I feel like I'm defective. I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. So we've got to figure out to be emotionally healthy, anger, fear, and guilt.
Wow. Now, during this COVID-19 pandemic, so many have had to live in isolation, unfortunately. Now, how does this impact our health and wellness?
Yeah. So we take quarantine, and I'm doing this because quarantine holds you in, confinement. And we mix this with it's too long. Quarantine that lasts too long ends up creating more and more anxiety and depression. So really, what we're preparing for is we have a mental health pandemic. We're going to have more mental health issues emerging as they are already than ever before. And so we want to be prepared to deal with this. We want to be prepared to really deal with the anxiety and depression. It's going to be, I think we could say right now, anxiety is an epidemic. Who don't you know who's struggling with some anxiety and everything that's going on? So that's why, my mission is, and our mission here at the Center, A Place of Hope, is to change lives for good, to equip you with God's help. We don't know exact outcomes, but we know that we can change our perspective. We're going to use this as a time to reset. Reset means, okay, I don't like what I'm in, but I'm going to grow. It's going to be a pandemic with a purpose for me. I'm not going to be defeated by this.
Wow. This isolation reduces the opportunity to maintain our relationships too. Now, in your book, you talk about the importance and the qualities of good relationships.
Yes. So relationships. So if we're isolated, maybe many of our relationships have been digital. Oh boy. And we've been over digitalized. Yeah, our relationships. And here's the issue. It's okay as an emergency provision to be able to have all the ways we can communicate digitally. But you know what? We need one another. And we're designed for touch. We're designed for hugs. We're designed for in-person interactions. And so let's remember the importance of that. It really is important. So as we emerge, reintegrate from all this, we need to remember real life relationships are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, speaking of relationships, you believe that it's important to have an accountability partner. So what exactly does this mean?
Well, if we're going to keep growing, and we've come through a mode where we've been shocked and traumatized by everything, and things felt like out of our control, and now we're moving into this growth mode. It's a mode that says, well, in order to keep growing, I need accountability. I just can't say, hey, I'm going to go out and do my 20-minute walk a couple times a day. Well, who are you holding that standard with? So we all need one another.
Yeah, it helps us to stay on track, doesn't it, right? Yeah, 100%. Now, you mentioned a daily walk. So you're a psychologist, not a fitness trainer, obviously, but you say that physical fitness is very important to maintain emotional health. Makes sense.
Oh, we've got to keep the movement up. Movement is so important. Movement and water. Have your water, okay? And one of the things, when we get full of anxiety, we tend not to drink our water. We tend to drink other things. So keep water up, keep movement up. The difference over time, it's just not one time. The difference over time will make a big difference.
I'm so glad now they have those flavored waters too, because water's not my favorite. It definitely helps me get the water
Come on,
in.
let's have your water today.
Good advice. Now, I wonder how many people will continue to isolate even after the restrictions are lifted, simply out of fear. What's your advice on this?
Don't let fear keep you paralyzed. Fear distorts reality. And maybe you need to test the waters. But we have been conditioned during this period to feel fear. There's the fear of the what if. So what if? What if this virus comes back? What if? And so we have all these potential what ifs that can create fear. So just as fear is kind of contagious. If we're afraid, we all kind of run together. Remember, courageousness is contagious. So let's be courageous. Let's create a positive direction. Now, I don't mean that's super easy to do, but we can do this together. Let's be courageous.
Yeah. Sounds great. It's just hard to practice sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
Now, in your book, you talked about the fact that God is in control, even while so much of our lives are out of control these days, especially. So, how can we learn to actually embrace this and be at peace with that?
Yeah. Here's what we need to know. It's a real test of faith. I'm going to decide fear or faith. And I got to keep deciding on this faith side. But one of the things is we're going to see, and I've seen it personally, we're going to see, wow, through all this, through this sheltering, God has been my shelter. God has been my shelter. And I'm growing through this. And every time in biblical history that God has sheltered someone and people have been sheltered, there's been a victory. So let's be on the victory outlook, shall we?
Yeah, good idea. Now, is it possible that God sometimes allows us to face uncertainty so that we learn to build our faith and trust in Him?
Yeah. That's why I say, well, how about this? Pandemic with a purpose. The purpose is I'm walking through some things that may be extremely stressful, may be really rough. I'm walking through those. Let's keep it up.
Good advice, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Jans. It was such a pleasure to have you on our show.
Nice to be with you today, and let's just say it, there is hope.
Exactly. That is Dr. Greg Jans. He is the author of 5 Keys to Health and Healing, available at aplaceofhope.com.
The COVID-19 pandemic has hit our economy very hard, including our agriculture industry. Will the food supply chain remain safe? Is the government offering sufficient financial aid for farmers and producers? To talk more about it is today's guest, Mark Fournier. He's an instructor at the Workland School of Agriculture Technology at Olds College in Alberta. Mark, welcome to BCN.
Thanks for having me on, Hal.
Now, the recent COVID outbreaks in meatpacking plants has caused some of them to shut down temporarily. How did that really impact pricing for beef and pork?
Well, we've seen prices go up at the supermarket, but we've seen, unfortunately, prices go down for our livestock producers. We actually have an excess of supply right now. Going into March, we actually had about 9% excess supply of beef at that point in time. So we can see prices continuing to decrease there. On the pork side, actually we're tied to the States on this one. We're doing pretty good with our supply, but because the United States had an excess supply as a result of COVID-19, we've seen that funnel over the border here, which has had a dramatic increase on hog prices. So for our producers, hog prices are going down as well.
How will the COVID-19 pandemic really affect producers in the long term?
Well, in the long term, we're going to have to wait and see. This has been a year that we did not expect, obviously. So there's been so many changes, rapid changes to our economy, to the sector, that we're waiting to see what the flow through is going to be. There are some bright side of things, and one of which is that our supply chain seems to be working quite well. So what we need to wait and see is how things are going to change as we open up. What's the economy going to be like? We know it's going to be down over previous years, but how is that going to flow through to the ag industry, to the individual producers, and ultimately the consumers? We're all waiting to see that one.
Now, many feedlot operators and ranchers say although the government has provided some financial aid, it's not nearly enough. Ottawa promised $252 million. How much more is needed, and what will the money go towards?
Well, there's a lot of different programs that are being announced right now, and I always like to say we have to look through the forest to see the trees. So we hear of these hundreds of millions of dollars that are being allocated for the ag sector. That's wonderful. It's great to hear that. Obviously, the ag sector needs it. But if we look at our friends and our neighbors, our producers, how are they going to see those dollars? So when I take a look at the funding programs that are coming out, we can see that there's national programs, there's provincial programs. I like to see the different ones that are coming to the different sectors, but I look at FCC. FCC has increased their lending programs, which is wonderful to see. We can see that AFSC is bringing in some new programs for producers as well. And on the government level, they're tapping into and complementing what's happening at the federal level, and they're also bringing in some programs that'll help with the perceived labor shortage here over the next little while.
Some say that with the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, many nations will continue to protect their borders and put stricter limits on trade. Mark, that would in turn affect Canadian producers who need to export livestock and grains. What are you hearing from the ag sector?
Well, actually, that's completely true. What we're seeing is a thickening of the border, and this is very common when there's different pandemics or economic shocks. People start to protect themselves, different countries protect themselves, and that's something that we can expect to see. So the border is definitely being thickened. People are looking at protecting their own backyard first and foremost. But we're very fortunate that the supply chain, as just mentioned, is open. The border, while people aren't going back and forth, there's still the transfer of goods and services across the border. So that is positive, and waiting to see what's going to happen here with China for the next little while should have a big impact as well. As you saw maybe today, that with the Huawei ruling that came down, unfortunately didn't go China's way. So are we going to see more retaliatory tariffs and retaliatory actions coming in from China? We're going to have to wait and see. We have a election going on south of the border. So is that going to impact our exports? We're going to have to wait and see. So I do expect things to be thicker, the border to be a little bit thicker than it has been for the last few years, but we still enjoy good relations with our friends here in North America. So I do think we'll still continue to see some exports.
Now, there have been some complaints from grain farmers that they were left out of the federal aid package for farmers. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's one I completely agree with. If you take a look at the grain farmers of Ontario, they've recently done a study, and they stated that almost 90% of their members are already seeing a decrease in income. Their members are also stating that a lot of contracts are being canceled right now, and we're only 5 months into the year, we're only a couple months into the growing season. We're seeing an increase in input prices and a lot of uncertainty. And so when we take a look at the grain sector, are they going to feel this? Absolutely they are. It's just not as fast as we've seen it on the livestock side of things. So I did like what they put forward, in that they would like to see some improvements to risk management programs. They'd like to see some improvements to agri-stability, some improvements to agri-invest. So there's some options that can be taken both at the provincial and federal level. So I think the grain producers are spot on that one.
Now, there's been some talk of producers deciding not to plant a crop this year and simply riding out the season. Do you know of any producers who've actually gone through with that?
I can say no on that one. Here in central Alberta, the last 4 weeks, we've seen our producers have to take off the last of harvest 2019 and then immediately turn around and put on seeding 2020. So the producers around here have been pretty busy as is, and I haven't had anybody state that they're not going to put a crop on. The people I've talked to are worried, obviously, but they're putting their ducks in a row, as you will, and are hoping for the best.
Some say that Canada's food supply could actually be threatened by this pandemic if the ag sector doesn't get the help that it needs. Is that possible?
I'm going to say no on that one. One thing we're very lucky to see is that we do have a very robust system. We have seen a decrease in not even the supply, we've seen a decrease in supply at the retail level. And we've seen an increase in supply at the producer level, obviously, which is why we're seeing more livestock inventory and hog inventory right now. I think a lot of people are concerned because for the first time in a generation, we've gone to the grocery store and we've seen empty aisles. It started with the toilet paper, then went on to the flour. Now we're going on to the meat, the chicken and the beef there. And in each case, the paper producers were saying, no, we've got plenty. When we saw the flour, we were being told, no, we have plenty. It was just the bags that were in demand at that point in time. And if we take a look at what's going on right now with poultry, for example, they've got an ample supply. They need more capacity to store the supply that they have. Our system for the last 15, 20 years has been a just-in-time inventory system. So we're used to we want fresh meat. We're used to getting meat a day or so after the previous load was cleared out. And now, people being people, are starting to purchase in bulk more than they have in the past. People are starting to fill their freezers more because of the uncertainty. And of course, that's led to an increase in demand, short-term at least, for the meat that we're seeing at the grocery store. So there is concern over this. But because of the robustness of our system and the supplies that we have in place, I think it's more of a production concern than a consumer concern. So from everything I've been seeing, no, there's no major concerns at this point in time.
With so many restaurants closing down, Mark, how has this really affected potato farmers and others who would normally be providing food for the restaurant sector?
Well, I was in a seminar here the other day, and what I was told is that of the average household, for their food budget, 30% of that budget goes to eating out, goes to the restaurants. And that came to a very abrupt closure here back in March. So obviously that led to some changes there. But as we see things opening up, we're not seeing people return to restaurants at the same capacity. They can't come back in the same capacity as when they closed. I had the pleasure of visiting a restaurant here this past weekend. Only about 1/3 of the tables were open up. So is there going to be a decrease in demand because of this? Absolutely. And it's always important to remember that we can't just allocate restaurant food to grocery chains. There's different supply lines, there's different rules and regulations that go around the sale of these types of products. So to simply say, well, if it's not going to go to the restaurant, we'll send it to the grocery store, that can happen over time, but it's going to take a while. So I do think we're going to see an increase in supply at the producer level, and that's very unfortunate because that's going to drive down producer revenues a little bit. How that's going to play out, is this something we can eat our way out of like we did with BSE? That's something we're going to have to examine.
Now, Mark, when it comes to the dairy farmers and chicken and egg producers, how has the COVID-19 pandemic really impacted them?
From what I've been reading, the biggest impact so far, and the couple of people that I've talked to so far, has been again on the supply side. With the decrease in demand due to restaurants, that's reallocated the supply and demand model a little bit more. So we are seeing some milk get poured out. We've heard about that, and that's unfortunate. Do we expect to see this continue into the midterm and long term? Probably, and I think that's why we're seeing the federal government come in with $50 million for the Canadian Dairy Commission and others so they can help buy up excess supply. So hopefully over the next several months, we'll see a bit of a redistribution in the demand. We'll see restaurants open up, and then we'll see things return to a little bit of the normal. But is there going to be a pinch in the short term? Yes, there is.
Now, is the ag sector still dealing with a major labor shortage at this point? And if so, are there any solutions?
Well, that's a tough question because as long as I've been working with agriculture, there's always been a labor shortage. And so is this going to compound the issue? Absolutely. As I mentioned, we do have a fairly good border system in place right now, but as everybody's aware, people can't go across the border. So the temporary foreign workers that we've relied upon in the past are unable to arrive. And that's going to continue on until at least January the 21st. Then we have to see what quarantine measures, if any, are going to be in place after that. So now we're probably looking into July, which is getting halfway through the season. Thankfully, there are some programs that are coming into place. I know here in Alberta, the government has created a job connection program for agriculture to try and match up workers with employers. And they've also opened up a labor training program where there'll be a grant for employers to set up the infrastructure that they need in order to bring in new workers. So that's some of the positive side of things. But I do think we'll see a labor shortage here this year. One thing I did hear, and we'll wait to see if this is going to happen, is with the restaurants closing across Canada, about 800,000 people were immediately out of work. And with restaurants and other food services only opening up at partial capacity, will some of those workers, will some of the summer students, for example, look at farm work and agricultural work rather than working at a restaurant? Maybe we'll see some of that change, or some of those changes as well.
So Mark, big picture, how is our agriculture industry going to fare once this pandemic is over? Will it bounce back to normal, or do you think we'll see a significant number of farmers go bankrupt?
Well, I truly hope not. I remember BSE quite vividly, and being down in Lethbridge there with Feedlot Alley, that was something everybody was quite concerned about. And so when I look at the shock to the ag sector, there's some parallels here. Unfortunately, it's for the entire ag sector. And the industry itself survived it. My biggest concern is the individual producers. Now, as I mentioned before, there's some programs that can be taken advantage of at the FCC level. So I strongly encourage people to give FCC a call because they've opened up a couple $100 million in new loan dollars there, which is wonderful to see. I know AFSC is bringing in some programs, some interest relief programs right now. And I think it's also important to remember that we do have some things going for us. Our low Canadian dollar. Compared to the States, our goods and services up here are still going to be comparatively that much cheaper, so there's going to be more demand because of that. And also, we still have intergenerational lows on the interest rates. So if individuals do have to borrow, thankfully, with a prime rate of about 0.5% or 0.25% right now, borrowing, while always expensive, is still something that might be an option. So we are very concerned about that, obviously. When I look at the industry, I'm not worried about the industry. I'm worried about my friends and neighbors that are farmers, and hopefully they'll be able to manage it here this year.
Mark Fournier is an instructor at the Workland School of Agriculture Technology at Olds College. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.